And we're live. Good evening. Happy Monday. And welcome to State of the Union on the Culture Shift Media Network. I'm Kimble, your host, the CEO of the Financial Services Innovation Coalition. And I'm also the Executive Director of the Southern Christian Leadership Global Policy Initiative. Uh, Tonight, my guests are awesome. First is Kellye Britton, Executive Director of the National Association of Minority Contractors of the Greater Atlanta area. And one of our recurring and favorite guests, our government contracting expert, Brad Anderson, CEO and president of the Global Risk Managers. And he's also the co-chair of the Financial Services Innovation Coalition's Infrastructure Inclusion Task Force. So welcome both. I tell you, Kellye, you are a real improvement to the last guest Brad brought on. So thank you for sharing your time with us tonight. Um, you've uplifted the whole show. You improved it. So you're new. You and I've just met, so I don't have your background. Usually, I can say, well, we talked about
Sure.
this, about that. But if you want to take a few minutes to talk about who you are and what you do at the NAMC and what your goals are and what we're going to talk about tonight.
Absolutely. So first, Kevin, thank you so
Oh,
much
Kellye, we
for
can't hear
allowing me
you.
to hear.
I can hear.
Oh
I can hear
no,
fine.
You can?
Yeah.
I appreciate the invitation. Anytime I can talk about the health and growth of minority businesses, I'm going to be in that room. Right now, I am the acting executive director of the National Association of Minority Contractors of Greater Atlanta. I know you already shared that. On the day-to-day basis, my goal and responsibility is to deliver programming and create bridges so that the businesses that are trade construction firms and GCs, for that matter, have all of the resources and the access that they need in order to increase and enhance deal flow, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we're in business.
Right.
And so, as a trade association, we support all of the things that help our member firms be successful in the marketplace. So that includes everything from workforce development initiatives with young people, because I mean, obviously, we know the state of the construction industry, to our TAP sessions, which TAP is an acronym for Technical Assistance Programming. And so, again, delivering programming to advance the growth and scale of trade construction firms in particular, and also GCs here in Atlanta and across our state.
Awesome. So how many members do you have?
So I always make sure I make the distinction because a lot of organizations are individual membership organizations. We are a member firm organization. So all of ours are minority and diverse owned businesses as far as our general members are concerned. And as of yesterday morning, that number has peaked at 144 member firms.
Wow.
Now, when I came on board in April of 2024, we had 65 member firms. And so if that speaks to anything, I think it speaks to the desire and the creation of businesses in our community. And so making my job even more pressing and important and imperative. So
Well, as
that's what
someone
we're
who's
doing in a nutshell.
no, this is well, I would say as someone who's spent a lot of time, you know, complaining about and urging, especially African Americans, to engage in the policy making process. It's good to hear that you have a growing organization dedicated to this.
Mhm.
I always say we go through these processes where the people who want to exclude us from business spend and invest a lot more money and time in doing that than we do in making sure we have business. So I
Absolutely.
congratulate you for that
Thank
process.
you. Thank you.
Brad
It's a
seems to
privilege.
be Brad, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, go ahead, Brad.
I can hear you, Kevin. I can't hear Kellye for some reason.
Yeah, looks like I'm the lucky one. Go ahead.
Well, I appreciate Kellye coming on tonight in place of President Ellis. President Ellis is the president of the NAMC Atlanta, main NAMC Greater Atlanta chapter, and he's been a champion supporting our efforts to advocate for minority contractors across the country. He's written, with Kellye's assistance, written letters to Georgia legislators, including Senator Warnock and Senator Ossoff, supporting our owner-controlled insurance program to help level the insurance playing field for smaller minority contractors and fund training, education, and workforce development programs. So I just want to applaud NAMC Atlanta's efforts on our behalf, supporting our advocacy.
Well, Brad, you had some photos. Or did you want Tracy to put those up? I don't know. I know you had some attachments. Do you want to start with the SBA document and kind of run down there that we can?
Yeah, we were just having this conversation about minority participation on a federal level, and this SBA report, as you indicated earlier, Kevin, identifies the minority participation across the board for the federal government, across agencies by race. Black contractors are not doing well at all. And I think that goes to the conversations we've been having about reinventing how we approach minority contracting and coming up with programs that can significantly impact the number of minority contractors and the size of minority contractors' contracts. And I know NAMC across the country is advocating this and fighting right now this anti-DE&I movement. And I don't know for sure that President Ellis is in Texas this evening to work on the HUD program, but I know right now in Texas, this reversal of minority contractors' participation in state contracting through HUD has been devastated. And Kellye, are you able to speak a little bit about what's happening in Texas for us?
Well, I mean, I think what's happening in Texas is an attempt at precedent setting that we've seen across, this administration. I think that there are some specific legal points to be made about who and what entity is attempting to dismantle that programming. And so I think that's a good starting point for the conversation: is who has the authority to change, so drastically alter and or dismantle minority contracting and programming. And so I think this particular one is one we should all be watching, because again, there's precedent setting behavior happening here, right? And so we have to pay attention to every aspect of how this unfolds, because it is actually not the typical that we've seen thus far in the attempt to dismantle programs for historically underserved businesses, DBE, MBE, MW, BE. So again, I think this one is a little unique to what we've seen before, based on who is attempting to dismantle the program. And so I'm curious.
Can you do a little more background on that? Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, I mean, I think in this case, if I'm not mistaken, is it the Secretary of State that is attempting to dismantle this program versus, for instance, when you look at the Department of Transportation IFR that came out at a federal level to departments of transportation nationwide, and it's then expected to be delivered upon by the state entity that reports directly to the federal DOT. In this instance, it's a state agency that is attempting to affect and impact a state program. And so I don't think that when we talk about some of the other things with regard to the administration, I don't think this is apples to apples. I think this is apples to oranges. And either way, what it then does is it takes what has been federal memos, IFRs, et cetera, and makes it a state issue, right? So again, I think there's some nuance here that we have to pay attention to.
What kind of just adding on to that, this is one talk about Texas, and Brad, I'll bring you back in 1 second. How many other things are you tracking? Like, I know we internally have been tracking the 8A program letter. I don't know how many of your members are 8A, if any, but we know that every 8A contractor was asked to submit the last 3 years worth of business or activities, whether they got a government contract or not, and many had not. And then the DBA had something very similar program. So we've been tracking those. What else are you tracking? So this 8A thing just came up, which I had not heard of. What else are you guys tracking?
So when you think about the work that we're doing, specific at the chapter level, a little bit different than the efforts that are taking place at the national level. And so we've had conversations about looking at all of the programs that are being restructured, if you will, for lack of a better set of terminology. And in each of these cases, what we are looking at is, number one, how many contractors do we have that are taking advantage of that programming currently? Two, what is the economic, so the dollar impact on the community? And then from there, again, we look at, in the meantime, what do we do? And I think when you look at how we manage as an organization these challenges, we rest on our 4 pillars, right? Access, advocacy, development, relationships. Because at the end of the day, before there was legislation, there were relationships. And so while we are looking at all of the requirements, right, for the recertification and that process, because that's essentially what we're talking about across the board, is the requirement to put together, this proof case, right, about, why you should be able to take advantage of this type of programming. Again, it's a lengthy process. I mean, all of the states at every level really are inundated with the task of gathering all this information, reviewing and assessing it, and then making their decisions. So the other piece that we looked at is across the country, because mind you, NAMC has 22 chapters across the country. And so we looked at, were some specific models that said, okay, this is successful, or this has been successful, and this hasn't. And so I think beyond the tracking of numbers, we're tracking success rates of recertifications. I think that's important as well. Specifically speaking, though, when it comes to the Texas Hub program, I want to go back to that just because I think that when we look at the requirements, or if you look at, let's talk about SBA, let's talk about 8A. It is really similar to the process that is being implemented by the Department of Transportation. So they're just different iterations of the same requests across organizations and agencies. And at the end of the day, the real question is, what's the criteria? And folks asking, these entities, when will it be reinstated? So you can do all of this paperwork, but when will the programs be reinstated? We've been talked to and about that being the ultimate question. So we're saying be in compliance, right? I mean, do you have we don't have a choice in that. Be in compliance, but ask the questions. And so when you talk about, advocacy from our perspective, it's having conversations about impact of this programming with your elected officials, right? All of them, because, it requires a bipartisan conversation to ensure that we have policies and programs that work for all of us. And so I think there are a few different ways that we're addressing and approaching the issue, and we have to take a lot of these things as they come. Every day.
The ground is shifting quickly.
Absolutely.
Brad, you're on mute. Oh, there you go.
Yep, I'm good. So, Kellye, with all of the civil rights leadership that's developed in Atlanta between Dr. King, Andrew Young, Maynard Jackson, John Lewis, all these giants, how can NAMC Atlanta work with like the Urban League, us at FIC and the SCLC? How can we work together to move these policies forward and to hold our elected officials accountable?
It's so interesting, Brad, this conversation about collaborative work and making sure that each organization—
Put yourself on mute. Yeah, there you go. Thanks. Go ahead.
That each organization looks at what areas and what, who they serve. Because I think when I look at, so for instance, there's this scene, this is such a tangent, but I just want you to come with me for a second. There's this scene in the movie Selma, right? Ava DuVernay's film Selma, where all of our leaders are in a room together, right? So it's SCLC leadership. There's a few other folks in the room. It's a dark room, and they're prioritizing the agenda of the voting campaign that they're on, right? And so when you look at this next generation, and I wouldn't even say next, I would say the up now and the up next. When you look at what our responsibility is, it is evident then as it is now. that it is our responsibility to set an agenda. So that means that we have to be in conversation. We have to lay out what the concerns are across the community, and then we have to prioritize them. And I think this is the piece that that I love the most about that particular scene in the film. They are having avid debate about which things have to come first. And so when you're dealing with the myriad of challenges, which we have been and are, then you do have to say which things are connected to the other. And once that is determined, each group, NAACP, Urban League, SCLC, Compto, AMAC, NAMAC, all of us, NABWIC, NAWIC, NOMA, all of the organizations have to come together and then select the item on the list that they are going to be responsible for, because it takes all of us in order to make significant change and to ensure that where we are today, and not to, as the young folks say, no shade to the folks who came before us, but who thought that you could dismantle 60 years of advancement in a year and 3 months?
Yeah.
Who thought that? Who thought that then?
I'm gonna say one thing about this, and this is
sure,
because it wasn't this Trump is the end game of a very long process. So if you go back to the Powell memo from 1971, that's when those guys all got together after the civil rights movement. The Justice Powell wrote that memo for all the corporations, which is what spawned Heritage. So I mean, so they really have been working on this. It took them a long time to get here, but to your point, we just weren't paying. Just like a lot of times when people see a bill get passed in Congress, they'll be like, "Oh, well," like they can just happen. The people have been working on it from inception to passage, maybe for 2 or 3 decades. That's Brad, how long he's been working on OSA. I mean, these things take forever, and with his experience, is not that unusual. That is, when you make change, it takes that long. So I always throw that in there because people get frustrated when they don't see quick results, and I'm like, no, this is a 3% deal, 3% all the time, not 30% once. So I'm sorry.
Absolutely. Well, no, Kevin, you know what though? What I would ask. Oh wait, go ahead, Brad.
Well, I was just going to ask you. I mean, you cited the Selma movie, and I'm wondering, is there much difference between what we're facing now and what they were facing then? And how do we all get together in that dark room? We'd love to work with NAMAC, bring in SCLC, bring in the Urban League, and have a summit in Atlanta to talk about how we move these things forward.
No, you know what, Brad? I think that, well, and I think about this often. I think that there's a fundamental desire that our community has always had, which is to be able to fully participate in the economic life of this country that we helped to build. So it's exactly what Dr. King was advancing when he was assassinated in Memphis, standing in support of sanitation workers, right? It's what John Lewis put his body on the line for. It's the thread that runs through that Selma scene in that movie to the SBA disparity reports that we look at today. So I don't think that that the issues necessarily have changed, but the structural tools, right, that have been built over the last 60 years, to Kevin's point, are what is looking at the gaps and how it could effectively disrupt that work. And so I think for all of us, the task is to come together, because we all are on the same highway in different lanes. And I think we have to look at the areas of overlap, the areas where there are those loopholes, and build effective solutions. And so when we talk about aggressive policymaking of the future, aggressive in the sense that it is, and I don't think anything's impervious for human beings. So, right, like there's no being impervious to, folks who wish to dismantle good. We're gonna characterize it as good. But the bottom line is, I just think that the tools have changed, and I think that, I think part of it is in the messaging. And so Kevin made that point earlier when we were talking backstage, really about all of the different ways that you can address some of the changes that are happening policy-wise, right? And some of that is to get good messaging out there. And so, again, I don't think that the economic argument has changed. I think that people are starting, I can't even say starting. I think they always knew that the economic argument was the moral argument, right? Like they're the same. But I just think our tools have changed. And of course, being baptized in the information age has made it, I think, even more challenging. Whereas we would have thought, 50 years ago that having channels to deliver information quickly and effectively to the masses was a great thing. It is until you're inundated with multiple channels of misinformation, right? So I think there are some additional steps that we need to take in order to build the future that we want in the now.
So I'm going to layer something on top of that and have a question. The one thing, whenever I look back, whenever I've researched the last 70 or 80 years, or I look at this, I always tell people, America is not one 300-year-old country, it's 4 80-year-old countries. And at every inflection point, there's this change. So you go back and look, our predecessors, the people who are, unfortunately, we lost 3 more civil rights people I know of this past month. You go through that process, what you realize that no matter what you think, but they were out on a ledge. They had no idea what they were looking over the abyss. They didn't know how all the inner workings. They had no idea how insidious they could all be. They had no idea how duplicitous people could be. I mean, they thought, for banking, they just said, okay, let's just do CRL or CRA, which is Community Reinvestment Act, make banks invest in people, never understanding that the banks were not even that important in the process, but that's all they saw. So they really were like, we now have a lot more experience. So, we know how much more complicated this is. Let me ask you this question. This is something I've been reading about the Trump Civil Rights Commission, speaking of talking about Trump, that, white men are being discriminated against. And so they want to use the civil rights movement to help white people. And I don't think we're pushing back enough on that. I haven't seen enough people push back on that. When that, I'll get to the contract numbers. Brad and I will keep going back over these numbers. But if in New Jersey, Black contractors get 0.14% of the contracts, how can there possibly be that white men are being discriminated against? Right? I mean, how are we letting them control that narrative? It's like we are not doing that. And I don't know if you guys, if you look at the contract numbers, you write letters of complaint. I know maybe a couple of your members have gotten contracts, but the idea that you're still under 5%, you're in Atlanta, you're 70% Black town and you're getting 5% of the contracts, that is a disparity that should be, but there's no way white guys are getting mistreated in that process. Kellye?
I have to sit with that one for a moment. Only reason why I say that is because I think,
you think white guys are being discriminated against?
Generally speaking, what I will say is this. I think that there are instances where a number of groups experience challenges in industry. And I think we have to be very clear about what those challenges are, because the distinction is actually what, to me, makes the most difference, not just this blanketed approach to discrimination, right? Like, in what ways? And I think that these, personal narrative statements that are being requested and required in the recertification process, for instance, are requiring people to be specific about the origin of their discrimination. I think it is easier, if this is an answer, it is easier for minorities, diverse-owned businesses, so women, disabled, et cetera, right, to identify very clearly the moments and times of discrimination.
Okay.
I think that is an easy feat. Do I know what that feat is for the other groups of folks who are claiming it? Not really. And so I would say I'm curious to see what those those personal narratives say, because then there's something for us to debate. Until then, I'm not sure what types of discrimination they're experiencing. Is it just that you've submitted for a contract and you weren't awarded it? That's not discrimination, that's selection. So I think we need to be very clear. And I think part of this next phase for this country is really focusing on the fact that words mean things, because, for the last, it's 2026. So let's take it all the way back to 2016. So let's go a decade, right? I think that there was a departure from language and truth. And I think they are directly tied to one another. And I think we have to return to using the right words to describe the right things so that the right policies are in place.
So then let me ask you this question that it brings up.
Sure.
Really, because I had this conversation with a couple of other, like some white lawyers or people we talked to, at 0.14%, New Jersey, I'm not sure you testify, but what possible rationale could you come up with besides blatant discrimination to suggest that Black people should only get 0.14% of contracts? Are you saying that we just really aren't qualified at that level?
No, I wouldn't say that, but I would ask, what is the level? I think we have to qualify these numbers in a way that allows us to see what we're truly working with. So specifically speaking, number one, I'm not sure about New Jersey's reporting requirement, what is mandatory and what is not, right? So when you look at the state of Georgia's program, for instance, it is a voluntary program. So is that percentage, right? I have questions. I want to interrogate that percentage. And then I want to look at, yes, do we need to look at the number of qualified minority firms that exist? Yes. And the reason why I say that is because we are experiencing a record shortage in skilled labor in construction. Where do we think that record number of losses or non-gains is taking place? If you just look at it strictly from a population perspective, just from a count perspective, the losses will be greater felt in our communities versus others based on the percentage of the population that we are, not to mention the percentage of the population that actually engages in work in specifically the construction industry, because that's obviously where we are. And so I think when you start to dig into those numbers, it presents completely different data sets, right? And actionable items for you, because for instance, when you look at the boots on the ground efforts of chapters like ours, it's to create, to grow and scale, and then proliferate around trade construction, small business ownership.
Yeah.
Well, those initiatives, I think, need more of the attention. And I think that's why trade associations are so critical right now, is because, yes, I do think that percentage is ridiculous, particularly considering even just baseline numbers, number of participants in the construction industry. I think that number is ludicrous. A 0.14%. I don't know what that's telling me, but I want to dig into it so I know what tier of firm are we talking about? What is their bond capacity? Like, what tools and resources, in addition to access to bidding government contract work, what are the other pieces to that puzzle? Because again, I don't think that policy is always the end all be all. There's an ecosystem around that policy that must be implemented and executed upon in order to make the policy work for us.
So so 10% of the contracting population is Black. So Blacks make up 10% of so 10% of the population gets 0.14% of the contractors. I do know that. Brad, I'm monopolizing the conversation. Go ahead. I'll let you ask a question. You're on mute. You're on mute, Brad.
Sorry.
No worries.
How's that?
We can hear you loud and clear now.
Sorry about that.
No
with the DOJ's recent raid of the Fulton County voter documents, there's a real effort to restrict voting, especially in the Black and Brown communities. We just had a picture up of Reverend Jesse Jackson and his, I remember very clearly being in Atlanta during the Democratic convention when he was running for the presidency, and how exciting that was for us. I know this is not particularly regarding contracting, but in essence it is, because in Atlanta, we have that strong Black voter initiative that puts Black people in positions of power to support smaller minority contractors. And you spoke earlier about the numbers for the city of Atlanta's minority participation, and we talked a little bit about Hartsfield Atlanta Airport, Maynard Jackson's efforts to make sure that minority contractors were very much involved in building that airport, and MARTA's efforts to have representation of the community in its construction and infrastructure development. Can you speak a little bit about how important it is for Black people to vote in order for us to have that policy that we need that advances minority companies being successful in building our own infrastructure?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's a really big question. Let me break it down. I think we need to start with a return to the Atlanta of yesterday, in the sense that there was
Am I frozen
I
to you guys?
think no, I can see you moving, Kevin.
Oh, you guys are frozen to me. You guys are like lagging on my computer. Sorry. Go ahead.
Uh-oh.
No
No
worries.
worries.
Go ahead. Go for it. As long as you.
Well, I think we need to return to the Atlanta of yesterday, in the sense that there was a visceral nature associated with voting and voting rights and civil rights in general. I think that, you go a couple generations away from that, and we're looking at a comfort society that is not necessarily well versed in the fight. We've gotten a little comfortable, and so when it comes to encouraging voter turnout, when it comes to encouraging more Black people to run for office, I think that we have to take it back to the rudiments and let people feel the impact of, the decisions in the booth. And I think that what's happening current day is allowing people who have never felt that sting, never felt to Keevan's point earlier, how duplicitous folks can be, in politics and policy work. And so I think what it creates is a desperation, maybe not desperation. I don't know if that's necessarily a word. I think it creates a sense of urgency, a dire sense of urgency to engage. And I think what you're also contending with, again, when we talk about, the impact of the information age, there's so much information that it's really hard for folks to discern. And so I think it's the responsibility of all the organizations. And I mean, if we look back, it used to be on the shoulders of the Black church to bring forward, candidates and help people to understand what they were really voting for and about on the ballot. I think we're missing that. And I don't want to assume that because we have access to more information, that it means that we are that much more civically intelligent or civically engaged, right? And so I think we have to go back to the culture in the community of voting, because it was a community thing. It's not so much anymore.
I do think, and Brad, I've had this conversation a number of times, that we are not as engaged. I mean, people who do vote almost reflexively, not thoughtfully. And I do think we have, even our business leaders are not focusing on why they're voting for who they're voting for, or what happens after they vote. I think the hardest part is being engaged in advocacy after the vote, and we've not done a good job of that. Let me ask you a question on the contracting. Since all this has come about, have your contractors, your members, complained about losing a lot of business, or how much business have they lost? Have you quantified that?
No, the national office has an effort to quantify that. What we are doing specifically in our chapter is we are surveying our membership to look at who is being impacted and in what ways. And then we're talking about, workarounds. We don't have control over every aspect of what is rolling, down. What we do have control over are the diversification of our business portfolios, right? If you are 100% dependent on government contracts, that is a poor business model in our industry, right? Because those things fluctuate and you need to be able to make payroll. So what we are looking at is really developing our member firms, be able to withstand the storm, irrespective as to who or whom is in office and what agenda is at play. Right. Because if we're not doing that, if we're not proofing our businesses from the whims of society, then we are not in the business of creating legacy firms. And that, that can never be the case, because that is why the trade association exists. That's why in 1969 in Oakland, California, two brothers got together and said, you know what, we're going to change some things, and we're going to start here, and we're going to start now. 22 chapters later, we are required to ensure that we are proofing our businesses, now proofing, future proofing, etc., so that irrespective of how the tide turns legislatively, that we have built strong enough relationships, big enough bridges that can hold us over in in these times.
Brad, do you have a question?
I do have a question. So Kellye, in light of the conversation that we were having before we came on air about NAMC's status and your ability to, or inability to advocate and to lobby, how can we work together with NAMC to maybe have a summit where we bring in Atlanta members of the House and the Senate, local representation? And I know you guys do this. I know you have the Washington fly-in where all the NAMC members come in and you walk the halls of Congress. But are you guys, do you have the capacity to do that in Atlanta? Could we work on that together? And Kevin mentioned that during the last show that I did with Kevin, we had representation from Ebenezer Baptist Church, Senator Warnock's church. We had his executive pastor on the show, bringing in the Black churches, as you mentioned earlier, which are such a key part of our voting. How can we work together to make something like that happen?
Well, I mean, I think it's just a matter of making sure that we bring everyone to the table. I mean, when you look at how we are structured, we are designed to be a bipartisan, come one, come all legislators organization. And so, when you speak about different state and local elected officials, we want to have everybody at the table. There's a man here in Atlanta that's doing a really great job of making sure that all the parties are at the table. Because again, we could look at what is happening on a large scale, and it ultimately is designed to create division, where each state and each city within that state has an opportunity to create something bigger than policy. And that's fortifying the relationships, because at the end of the day, everyone who is in business to make money. And so that part is a part of the common ground. That's one. Two, I think you have to be intentional about having as many voices of the impacted in those spaces. So whomever you bring to the table, and I think that's part of what our national president, Mr. Stimley, has been working to do. So when you look at the cases that NAMC is involved in at a national level, the point of what we do as NAMC in advocacy is to ensure that we are in the room and in the conversation, so that conversations happening about us, policy that affects us, is spoken to by us. And so I think that's the best thing we can do. And so I'm sure our board and multiple chapters are always going to be interested in making sure that we're voicing the concerns of our constituents. And so as long as that space, whatever space it is, open and welcome to hearing that impact and hearing the stories of the people, then I think anything is possible. So, I mean, yes, let's organize that, but ensuring that what and who is centered are the impacted parties. And in this case, for us, would be the contractors.
I have a question for you. Well, first of all, when is your Washington fly-in?
So that happens annually. And I believe, I need to look at the calendar, because I believe it's in September again this year.
During Black Caucus?
Yeah, well, it's right before.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So how many, I mean, Atlanta's, I know you're folks mostly in Atlanta, but you may know the national numbers. What percentage of, and I'm talking about this because the war is moving along at a good clip, we're spending trillions of dollars on every day, or billions of dollars every day, and talking about replacing weapon systems, et cetera. How many Black contractors. I'm not focused on minority. I'm not talking about women or veterans. I'm actually specifically talking about Black contractors. How many
Mhm.
Black contractors do you think have contracts with the Department of Defense?
Mm. Uh, I have never tracked those numbers specifically, because again, those are folks that are like, like building, machines. We're looking at the built environment when it comes to edifices. And so I don't know that we have those numbers, but I
Well, they
too am
build what? They
curious.
would build like hangars. I mean, someone like hangars and floor. I mean, there would be construction
I
involved.
imagine, no, I would imagine there is, but I don't know that I would be interested to see who is tracking, if at all, tracking those numbers. And I mean, I think it would have to be a federal initiative. I don't know that states would do that.
Okay. Okay. Um, so do you guys have, we've talked about this a lot, and so maybe you already answered it, but the Pentagon, have you guys talked about, have you done any work on like language for the budget or the appropriations committee? Do you guys like send letters, like trying to make sure that like whatever's being, or talking to your legislators about not voting for a budget unless it includes stuff for minorities or minority contractors particularly?
Not necessarily, Kevin. I think there are a number of organizations that do. And then I think, as far as if we were to be included in those conversations, that's definitely a national initiative. At the chapter level, we are looking more at what programs already exist, right? And how we maximize participation in those. But I mean, I think those two things go hand in hand. So I am curious to see if the national organization can do that. And again, I think there's such a fine line between advocacy and lobbying and policy interpretation and execution and practice of policy versus, the language of and where that policy goes. And I think we need to bring Rodney on here so he can speak to uh, how, the strategy behind that from the NAMC national perspective, for sure. And I'm
Are you
sure
passing the buck? Are you passing the buck to Rodney?
I will pass a few of those bucks. Now, some of them will stay and stop with me, but that one in particular is going to be a national initiative and question for sure.
So then I'm asking you even hard. This is a really hard question then. So
Okay, here we go.
So there's this concept called opportunity zones, which you may or may not have heard of over time.
Mhm.
It's a tax provision in the budget that allows for the creation of these zones. And for a while, I've been opposed to them as a group. We're opposed to them, but they keep passing in the law, so we're trying to figure out a way to work with them. And what we did, anytime someone calls us about an opportunity zone or supporting a fund or a zone, first thing we say was, how many minority contractors do you have in that space? I mean, have you guys reached out to the people who are using taking advantage of the opportunities fund tax credits to see if they will hire you to build the buildings, or have you tried partnering with any of those guys in the Atlanta area?
Well, I mean, I think there are a number of organizations who are doing a great job of being inclusive in our city and in our state. When I think about, like, the first organization that comes to mind when it comes to that is Invest Atlanta.
Okay.
They've been doing an outstanding job of making sure that they've identified underinvested areas, right? And then they look at, I think they have a unique approach to looking at these areas and determining specifically what those areas need in order to be successful. And I think the number of jobs that they've created, and they've got some direct incentives for small business investment, et cetera. I think they've done an excellent job at making sure opportunity is abound.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of another organization where I've seen use of opportunity zones for the benefit of the current community, right?
Mhm.
And the community of the future. Let me think.
Do any of your companies have opportunity funds?
No, not that I know of off the top of my head. I would have to do some surveying with regard specifically to that. But I will say that when it comes to program participation, availability, and support, when it comes to capital access, things of that nature,
Mhm.
like I said, Invest Atlanta is really the only organization that comes to mind immediately, as it pertains to Opportunity Zone specifically.
Okay. And new market tax credits and CDFIs.
Brad, you came off. What were you getting ready to say?
Do you want to answer Kevin's question first, or do you want to that's a different question?
Oh, you're asking a different question. I thought you were
Yes.
chiming in on Opportunity Zones. I'm sorry, Kevin, say that one more time.
No, I said I was going to ask you the same thing about, have you noticed since opportunity funds came online, there's a lot of discussion about whether new market tax credits and CDFIs are still warranted. I mean, the administration kept them, they were set to expire, they extended them. But have you experienced, any of your builders experienced any work with people who have new market tax credits?
I don't know that that's been an issue that we focused on, particularly with the trades. Wait, Kevin, are you saying? Oh, I couldn't tell. I think I was frozen for a second. Yeah, no, I don't know that we've spent a whole lot of time looking at CDFI specifically, but I do think it's an area that we should explore. If we're talking about ways to improve programs, I think we need to do some surveying. What has worked? What hasn't worked? What should stay and what can be improved versus what needs to be innovated or recreated, if you will. So I'm making a note about that because I keep my notebook out. I'm a student of debate, and so I'm making a note about the conversation that we need to have around that.
Awesome. Yeah. And if you need help surveying, we'd love to be a part of the survey effort just to figure out for our own standpoint about what's happening, especially a city like Atlanta, which is majority Black. So those numbers will be very telling.
Kevin, if you volunteer, now just know I will take you up on that.
I said I would love to be the helpful, like I want to observe. I didn't say I wanted to do the work. I said observe.
We're gonna put you to work over here, Kevin.
So Kevin wants to observe and supervise.
Yes, right. Yes. I'm managing it.
Listen, trust me.
TPS reports. I want to look at those TPS reports.
I deal with Kevins all day. Trust me, I know how to get them to work without even knowing that they're at work. Don't worry, I got it. I've got it.
I'm a highly trained professional, Kellye. You're to put the time in on that. Brad, go ahead.
So Kellye, you were talking a little bit about Invest Atlanta, and Kevin was just mentioning the fact that Atlanta, and really Greater Atlanta, has a really strong minority population and a really strong group of elected officials making policy. Can you talk to us about some of the successes that NAMC is seeing for its contractors and some of the communities around Atlanta, and what those policies and practices are that other cities and states might be able to emulate?
Well, I don't know that it's necessarily specifically related to policy, and I think policy is always complementary to the ground effort. And so in Atlanta, what we've done a really great job of is building networks that talk about the realities of what we're experiencing, and when it's time for us to mobilize, that's what we do. And so when you look at, for instance, organizations like RICE, the Russell Innovation Center for Entrepreneurs, right? There's a need. So when you look at the number of new Black-owned businesses that are created every year in the city of Atlanta, they're created by Black women. 90% of those businesses were solopreneurships. They saw a need to assist small businesses in growing and developing, and created a center around it with resources. So that's a solution. When you look at NAMC, what we have done is established excellent relationships with the decision makers in our industry. We convene with them monthly. Then we have a huge event in July where we bring everybody together to talk about the state of the union, for lack of. Yes, of course I'm going to do that on the show. Of course I'm going to do that. But the bottom line is,
good job. Thank you.
We are solidifying the relationships that make business move forward. And I think, again, when we talk about anything, whether you're talking about joint efforts to enact policy, or the advocacy for those policies, or being very specific about what we want participation goals to look like, and then the execution and audit of those goals. Any of these things that you talk about, at the root of them requires a relationship. Because if I've learned nothing else about what has transpired in the last year, is that laws, policies, rules only truly exist when all parties observe, acknowledge, and abide by them. You don't influence that by putting things in writing. We've seen this. There's been, what folks have labeled, as, lawlessness. What, and in fact, what it really is just ignoring the rules. And so what we have to create is a society where people are not just obligated for fear of consequence, but feel responsible and accountable for abiding by the guidelines and rules that we have set as a society, because they make everyone better. There's been a departure from an understanding that, what happens to you happens to me. I think people are learning that right now. And so it is our job to ensure that in this moment of learning, that we capitalize on that by pushing it further and saying, here's how we work together. Here are the things that we have to do to be successful collectively. And I think that each community has that, right? So when you look at different minority communities who circulate their dollars in their communities, more frequently than the dollars in the Black community, you see that type of collective economic approach to mobility. I think that now we have to bring all of the factions, the silos together so that everyone is clear. Again, because I think we were clear on this at certain points with, different eras of leadership in this country, that economic prosperity requires all of us to be engaged and to actively look out for one another, because, a rising tide raises all the boats. That's what our president of our local chapter always says. And I think, again, if we don't start to look at the philosophical and the practical in what, we have relied on the law to do the heavy lifting for us, if we don't have a return to civility and true civic engagement, and really reconnect policy to moral argument, which, if that's not Dr. King, I don't know what is. So I think it's just a return to the understanding that when we fall, we all fall. And when we rise, we all rise. And part of that means that, our community has to be thought of and considered and supported.
So we got like 7 minutes. Whenever I start one of these, when I plan one of these shows, I look at the clock. I'm like, how am I ever going to fill an hour's worth of time? Then I always end up like, oh man, an hour's up. I haven't even got like 3 more questions. So I'm going to ask you both these questions together.
Okay, sure.
First one is, you mentioned that you guys are doing some legal cases, and Brad and I'm talking about that, like, African Americans don't spend enough time suing, even though you may lose these suits, but the lawsuits get done, and our guys never put their 2 cents in, or we don't send amicus briefs when the case is before the Supreme Court, or even file amicus briefs, etc. So that's one question. Are you guys, or the national or local, have you guys done any legal cases? Then the second thing is, this is an example of, do you have a Cleveland chapter? I wanted to ask you, because the Cleveland chapter kind of abdicated, or Cleveland City Council and mayor abdicated all of its authority to Sherwin-Williams when they were building their headquarters. It's a $1 billion headquarters with both public-private money, and there were out of 5 prime contractors, there were no black primes, and the city's 60% or 55% black majority city council and a black mayor. And so that ties back into your point about civic engagement and advocacy, and the fact that the political leaders did not defend the people. And if we have people who are elected who don't defend us, they were pretty much there's no place else to turn. So those are 2 questions, if you had any idea about Cleveland, but more importantly, legally, what are you guys working on?
So I think there's a few key things. First and foremost, let me say rest in peace to Reverend Hilton Smith, who was the former president of the Cleveland NAACP, and who's also been a key figure with NAMC. He's the godfather of NAMC, if you will, and he passed away a couple of days ago. So the city of Cleveland is in mourning right now. And I just want to acknowledge the impact that Reverend Smith has had on industry as a whole, on Black business, and in really, you know, being one of those people that fights for the community in all ways, always.
It's
So
been a
rest
tough
in
week
peace.
it's been a very rough couple of weeks for civil rights leaders. I mean, we've lost
Absolutely.
a lot of lions have gone down this month.
That's right. And he was one of them. Titan of industry, man of integrity, a fighter, and a person who was always advocating for the good of the community. So I just want to acknowledge that. Now, when it comes to legal cases, I think it's important again to note that NAMC is a 501c3. So when it comes to what we do, when it comes to legal matters, is we act as interveners. And when you look at, in particular, the Kentucky milling case, you know, in order to truly understand the impact of the decisions that are being made in the courts, you need people who are the voice of the people. And so that is often what you'll find NAMC interacting when it comes, you know, to legal matters. What we are doing, we are providing the information so that decisions are being made with all of the context. And that's the case in particular with the Kentucky milling case. Of course, you know, we talked earlier about the Texas Hub case. These are two, again, of the major focal points right now, because these are precedent-setting opportunities. And so in that instance, National will work with the local chapters, and they will determine what the voice of the people is, and then, you know, petition the court to be actively involved in sharing that information. But as far as, again, policy creation, we're not into that as an organization locally or nationally, to my knowledge. But again, I mean, things change. 501c3 designations, you know, you got C4s and C6s. So there's a lot of things that, you know, could potentially change with that. I'm not that decision maker. But what I do know is that when we are called, we show up. We're in the room, we're at the table, we're having the conversations, whether you're talking about, you know, senators' offices. I know Brad mentioned earlier, Senator Warnock, you know, we've got, you know, a number of local and state legislators who want to hear from the impacted parties. And when they call upon us to answer those questions, we're going to be in that room, because that is, you know, part of the key in advocacy work, is making sure you have a voice at the table.
Brad, the last 2 minutes are yours.
Well, you know, I just want to thank Kellye for doing such a great job. I was just sending Mr. President Ellis a message letting him know that he was extremely well represented. And Keevan, I'm thinking in the future, you know, we just turn to Kellye.
We'll skip the middleman. We got
Yeah,
the sources. Yeah, let's skip the
because Kellye knows what's going on.
Yeah, totally. And totally, Kellye, if there's ever something that's going on that we need to make people aware of, please don't hesitate to reach out and jump on and do the show. We'd love to.
I would love to.
People now.
I would love to. And, you know, I have a passion for the work that we're doing here, because it's been my mission since I left corporate in 2003 to serve and support Black-owned businesses, in particular, women-owned businesses, disadvantaged business owners. And I've done that successfully and continue to do that through my work here at NAMC. And so it's a privilege and an honor to be called and to answer that call at every turn. So I appreciate being included in the conversation. Thank you.
You're a champ. We appreciate you.
She's a highly trained professional, Keevan.
Clearly, we've tripped across a gem in this process. Look at that.
Taking a page out of your book, Keevan.
It's a short book, so it won't take you long. Thank you all everyone for tuning in. Kellye, Brad, thank you for coming on. Good night.
No problem.
Thank you, Keevan. Good night.
Good night.